My guest on this week's episode of Suds Search is Petra Kis-Herczegh, Senior Solutions Engineer at Yext. Petra is an in-demand conference speaker who has been everywhere lately. A few places you might have heard her present include MozCon, SearchLab, and Brighton SEO. She is also an active member of the Women in Tech SEO community. Petra is an excellent blogger and writer. I started our conversation asking her about a recent blog post she wrote for Moz about the importance of soft skills in SEO. While it may seem obvious that SEOs need to work on their soft skills, I've met and worked with plenty of highly technical, highly effective SEOs who roll their eyes anytime the topic of soft skills comes up. Petra also gave one of my favorite talks at this year's MozCon. Her presentation was about things she learned from working with a sales team that every SEO should know. I loved this chat because it went outside of the normal talk track of tactics and strategies and got to the heart of the everyday workplace conflict and how if we put ourselves in the shoes of a salesperson, we might learn a few things that make us better at our jobs. Grab something cold to drink and join me for a conversation with Petra Kis-Herczegh. We'll talk about how being a proactive listener can make you a better SEO. We'll spend some time talking about SEO maturity within an organization. And I have to ask her about her talent for making some of the nicest looking presentation slides I've ever seen. All right, Petra, welcome to Suds Search. How you doing?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
It's great to have you on. You are fresh off of a very exciting summer and early fall. Couple of collaborations with Moz that I wanted to ask you about. The first was a blog post that came out this month. So we're filming this in September, so recently, about the top 5 soft skills an SEO should develop. I think first, this might sound like an obvious thing. Of course, we need soft skills, but I know there's a percentage of people who are listening. I'll just put it this way. There's a percentage of people on my team who roll their eyes whenever I have this conversation about soft skills. So there's a perspective maybe that, the work should matter, the performance should matter, and very little else. Why did you decide to focus on soft skills? And what sort of, disagreement might you have with that point of view?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I love talking about soft skills because, as you said, I think it's not to say it's controversial, but it's probably often forgotten a bit. And understandably, because obviously we work in a very technical field, but I think the first thing I always say is that it doesn't matter if you work in a technical field. At the end of the day, we're all still working with people. So soft skills are just essential to pretty much any career, but I think it just gets really forgotten in SEO sometimes. I really wanted to focus on this because I think it can really make career progression, learning processes much easier if you actually develop these soft skills. So I thought that hopefully people will enjoy it and learn something from it.
Well, I love it, and we will link to the post in the show notes. I wanted to point to my favorite of the top 5 soft skills, if I could. It's something you also brought up in your MozCon presentation, so there's a little bit of overlap, but one of the top 5 soft skills was storytelling. This is so important whether you're trying to get, as you mentioned in the MozCon presentation, buy-in from leadership, or whether you're really just trying to have a client call. That ability to tell a story, I think, is really, really important. And so, this is well over a year ago now, we started to really look at our client calls. So how our consultants were engaging with our clients. And one of the things we found was that they would read some statistic or some metric without any real story or reasoning. Our satisfaction with clients, I think, really improved when we started to emphasize, you got to have a little bit more storytelling in these calls, or clients are going to have a hard time. One of our top team leads, Jeff, he went so far as there's a rule. There's no metrics without a story on his team. He's doesn't allow it. Yeah. In a big picture, how have you seen that storytelling ability play out over your career? Why is it so important?
Well, I think, and especially with leadership, which was part of the topic as well, I think storytelling is just really powerful to build connections and really, build connections and build trust and rapport in a much shorter period of time than what you would have if you would rely on the usual sort of educating your client. You don't always have the luxury to educate leadership, whether you're in-house or agency. You just don't always have that time. With a story, because we are all emotional human beings, you can really connect with people and you can yeah, you can really tell a very complex sort of idea in just a very relatable way. And I think that works really well in SEO and in probably most other industries.
All right, well, I love it. And the other one that I loved on the list was proactive listening. So proactive listening was one of the top 5 skills. This is another one of these things that's really hard for me to do. I think we're busy people. You know, we've got a lot to do. We have to get many things accomplished. And proactive listening requires us to slow down a little bit, which is hard. You know, you've got a lot going on. So it also takes a certain amount of humility, I think, to get there. But there are these benefits, right? Tell our audience, if they're willing to do the work to be a proactive listener, what are some of the benefits that they might reap?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's not only to slow down, but a lot of times when we go into conversations, we go in with an idea, a goal that we want to achieve. And proactive listening means that you might not end up with that same goal because you actually need to listen to the other person first. So if you have sort of assumptions already on what you think the other person might be thinking or what you want them to think, then it can be really challenging because it's very conflicting. But essentially what proactive listening helps with, again, it really helps with obviously building those relationships. It's not really possible without that, I think, to be able to build that trust. It's also making sure to get to a right solution. So I emphasize on this as well because of what I mentioned, that a lot of times we just have a set idea of how we think something should work. In SEO, we do the work, we research it, we look at case studies, and we have an idea of like, this is what we want to do. And then we go and talk to our stakeholders or our leadership with our idea that that's what we want to achieve. But the reality is the process is how the business is set up, what the business wants to achieve has to play into that. And in order for us to come up with a really collaborative solution, we have to listen to the stakeholders and leadership, and we have to listen to why things are important to them. And I think it's also another reason is also that not everyone is a great communicator. Communication is obviously another soft skill I mentioned there, but your stakeholders or your leadership might not be a great communicator. So unless you're a really good listener, you might actually miss the point because they might not be communicating it the best way, or they might not be saying it the way you can easily understand it. So it's hard work to listen with the goal to actually understand what the other person means by what they are saying.
Well, outstanding. I mean, this dovetails nicely into your MozCon talk, which was titled "The Things I Learned from Sales That Every SEO Should Know." So I loved this talk, by the way. I think you deserve all of the praise that you've been getting on SEO Twitter and elsewhere.
Thank you.
It's different than the typical how to improve your page speed type presentation, how to do keyword research, sort of tactical. I wonder if you could set this up for us a little bit, though. How did you come to work closely with sales in the first place and learn all this stuff?
Sure. So I started my SEO career in-house. I was working in travel and fashion, both in e-commerce. And I really, really enjoyed that. And what I think a lot of SEOs sort of see as well as they grow their careers is that the higher up you get, sort of as you become an SEO manager, you really have to divide your time between actually executing SEO and doing the practical hands-on bit. But a lot of your time is actually taken up by meetings, by talking to leadership, by having challenging conversations with stakeholders. So as I sort of had that experience, I realized that as painful as it can be, I really, really enjoy it. And I really enjoy getting better at it and learning from some of those conversations and doing it better next time. So I'm also a very technical person, and I really enjoyed using some of my enterprise tools at the time. So when I've seen a job with one of these enterprise tools, I wanted to explore that. And essentially what that meant is that I can help for these software companies, what I've been doing for the last 3 years. I can help the sales teams facilitate those conversations from a technical point of view. So I'm pretty much just took that second half of my job that I was doing in-house anyway, and just made it into my career.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, to get into the talk itself, the first part is about SEO maturity. That basically organizations are at different stages of maturation when it comes to SEO. In simple terms, what helps to distinguish a mature and an immature organization as it relates to SEO?
Sure. So I think one sort of like easier example to give is that if you're often hearing the phrase that things need to be SEO'd, and you have your content, and can you just please SEO this content or submit your optimization after things have been launched, then that's clearly a more immature state, because what we really want to achieve is for SEO to be really part of that iteration process, ideation process, and for it to really be collaborative, and for you as an SEO to be really integrated into whether that's the product team, the marketing team, the real goals that you're trying to achieve. You want to be involved from the early stages, and you want to be considered.
I love that. So there's something you have this OMG graph that you use. With your permission, I'd like to link to the OMG graph in the show notes. First of all, is this something for public consumption, and how do you use that? That was a very interesting feature.
Yeah, so it's a publicly available graph. I created that with Tori's help, Tori Great from the Great Company. So I actually started working on this as soon as I left my in-house SEO role. And I started developing this because I thought it can help the conversations I'm having with sales. Because the first question I always wanted to understand is, what sort of maturity level does the client have? How much are they being understood? Because I knew my challenges, the two companies I worked for, I knew that I was perceived very differently because the maturity was at very different levels. So that was really important for me to be able to understand what level of maturity do those clients have, which is why I started to put this together as a resource. And after that, I really wanted to make this more sort of generically available, not just for enterprise, for any sort of business. And I asked Tori to help with that. Obviously, she has a great amount of experience working in agency. So she's been really helpful with helping sort of develop that and helping develop the right questions for anyone to measure that. So it's publicly available, and it focuses on 4 core areas: the efficiency, technology, strategy, and culture. And I think what's important about it is that maturity can change a lot. And I think that the one sort of example I could give here is that, let's say you're working in a business that has high level of SEO maturity. You're considered as part of the process. You're asked about your views and opinions and your recommendations. But let's say that's because you have a CMO who's very supportive of the SEO strategy and you built a really good relationship with them. Now, let's say that CMO leaves and now the business is hiring for someone else. Of course, processes and the technology you have could be really helpful going forward, but there is sort of, in order to replace that missing piece from the culture, what that CMO potentially have created around SEO will need to be replaced, and you will need to work again with whoever is being hired next to recreate that culture. So it's not something that you can sort of set and forget. It's definitely something that forms with time, and that's why I mentioned in the talk, you need to not only focus on growth, but you need to focus on how you can nurture it.
I love it. And then going through the talk, the next lesson learned was that things aren't always as they appear. So throughout the talk, you're talking about buy-in land, which is something I think many people listening to can relate. So we've all probably had that experience of, in the talk, somebody is saying SEO is of paramount importance, and then we get the budget and it shows that it is not of paramount importance. Or you have a term that I love, that is the buy-in-ish cycle, right? What is the buy-in-ish cycle? And what lessons have you learned maybe to avoid it if we can?
Yeah, sure. So the buy-in-ish cycle is really something that looks like you've got buy-in, someone is saying yes, but what they actually mean is no, or just yes, but. So I think the buy-in issue we can probably often relate to that is when the business tells us that SEO is really important, and of course they will prioritize it and they will focus on it. But as you said, it doesn't necessarily reflect in the budget and the support and the resources that are being allocated to SEO. And I think, well, during the talk, I obviously mentioned this as well, but I think what's important about it, first of all, is to recognize it, because the reason why I put that ish and I didn't name it to something else is because it does often looks like buy-in, and we don't necessarily realize that we are actually kind of being put into a more difficult position than if someone would just say, no, just forget this idea, focus on something else, don't waste your time here. That a lot of times can be much better, because if you get sort of into this buy-in-ish cycle, if you get into this loop, then you're essentially just wasting time, not actually achieving the right results. You feel like you're moving a step forward, but 2 steps backwards every time.
All right, so that's awesome. So the advice is be a little bit more skeptical of yes, be a little bit more jaded maybe, and I think this is a great insight, because it's about reframing things a bit. Instead of getting to yes, we are only trying to get to the next step. I think that's how you put it. Get to the next step in a multi-step process. So here's the next issue I can see. There's you're talking to stakeholders now. They are going to want to know KPIs, and anything that doesn't fit into the KPI, anything that isn't a metric that you can measure, is tough in buy-in land. So I can confirm, there's something from your talk that I can definitely confirm, that having someone watch GBP and make sure that the hours are correct and that it's optimized properly and all that is really, really important. But I can't really prove that you would have lost money or that some negative would have happened if you didn't have this person doing that. So the idea is, how do you address the unaddressable? That's the question that your talk asks. So I will ask your question back to you. How do you address the unaddressable things that don't fit in that KPI, don't have a nice, neat metric? How do you address those sorts of things?
Yeah, so I think that's where, again, soft skills become important as well. So storytelling really helps with that. Everyone understands stories. So create those user-specific stories with examples. So you can still use, you should still use data wherever you find data to sort of paint that picture and paint that story, really. But a story can really help address something that's unaddressable, and that story will help you understand more about the business challenges as well, that will actually get you to the right data. Because there is, in my experience at least, there is almost always data out there. Probably the problem is there is too much data out there and too many different case studies and resources. And let's say if we are focusing on the business hours and local SEO, we just look for local SEO case studies, but that data we find maybe doesn't speak to our leadership or doesn't speak to our stakeholders. So it's probably much more beneficial to start with a story, start with questions, start with concerns, start with understanding what data does the business actually have. Because we always look at Search Console data, Google Analytics data. Do we also look at CRM data? Do we also look at the store data, the store sales? Do we ask the store managers if people complain about this? I had this experience in my past. I worked e-commerce retail. Both my roles were e-commerce retail, where we actually had a back to floor day where the digital team would go to the retail stores to help out for on one of the busiest days. And some of the questions I asked were obviously what sort of questions people come in with. And one of the store managers actually told me that some people came in complaining about the data being inaccurate. And that's a real customer who came into the store. And while that's not necessarily the quantitative data you want to have that shows how many millions of pounds or dollars you're using, that is still a real customer story that you can reference. And sort of starting with that initiative, you can start exploring where can I look at more of the store data? Do we have anything on like bank holiday hours or like any holiday hours and the sales, and how does that change? It's really part of the conversation, but I think you need to use those soft skills, the storytelling, the collaboration piece to get to the right data to address the unaddressable.
I agree with everything you're saying. I think that's a really good insight and works well. So the next part in this process, the know your audience. So in this case, I think this sounds like something as marketers we do all the time, like know your audience, but it's not even the customer necessarily. And you're talking, this is about the audience's leadership. So you've been through some of these battles in buy-in land and in where it's gone well. Walk me through some of the common, pitfalls of understanding leadership. What are people not getting?
I think there are a couple of things here. So one thing I think mentioned in the talk as well is that we don't always remember that leadership are also human beings. Have their problems. We try to put these conversations sort of out of that box, and if they don't go exactly as we planned because leadership didn't listen to us because they had a bad day or something, like it just gets us a bit derailed. So I think just understanding that we're all humans and just understanding them on a human level is really important, what type of people they are. Now, once we do that, then obviously that really helps with choosing the right language as well, choosing the right story, the right examples, the right narrative. If we understand them better, we know what sort of use cases will talk to them. And the third thing, there was a third thing which just got out of my mind now. So obviously there is the language. Oh yes, I know. So this is something I've made as a mistake many times early on in my career. So I was always very enthusiastic about SEO. So whoever wanted to talk to me about SEO, I went in not only with the sort of maybe more technical language, but also with the idea to educate people more, not necessarily in a bad way, but still leadership does not want to be educated in most cases, especially not if you're going in to talk to them. So my approach definitely changed a lot after the first few conversations, where I think I had a more educational approach, and I was trying it out that way. Even I heard sometimes from leadership to say like, yes, we want you to come in and educate the teams and educate the company. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean they want you to educate them. So at least in my experience, make sure to again choose a language and choose storytelling instead of, I don't know, trying to create a session that is focusing on explaining them what hreflang is, or what I don't know, what's the helpful content update about. Like you don't have to mention that. You don't have to phrase it that way, right? Like you can just, the helpful content update is a perfect example where you can reference that something is important to Google, but it's actually so user focused. You already have those stories there that you can tell to focus on that, to focus on writing relevant and helpful content to your customers.
I love it. Well, the last thing to ask you about, so you can't win every fight, right? You get into these rooms, you're one of many stakeholders. This is a story about prioritization, I guess, which is popular for SEOs, but it's really a little bit about checking your ego. So this is hard I'll just say it's hard for me. So we work really hard to come up with a strategy for SEO. Bust our butt for like a long time, pour a bunch of hours into it, and now we're going to have a fight over some things. Some things got to go. Like we got to prioritize and figure out what are the top most important things. I think as a human being, this can be hard because you have to check your ego at the door. How can you decide what to take out on something that you've poured your energy into at work? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, very good question. I think I mentioned this in the talk as well, that like this is probably the hardest one for me still as well. And And I even said it's not necessarily something I myself always follow, but it's still a good advice. I know it works. When you manage to follow it, it works out well, but it's very difficult to let things go. I would say exactly what you mentioned, focusing on, do I just want to prioritize this because of ego, because it helps my KPIs? It could be emotional reasons. Again, just we are attached to specific projects that we just really want to do because we enjoy working on them. So I think it's important to double check all of those. And obviously with the right sort of prioritization metrics, you can be much more objective about it. So you can create a prioritization list that way. I also recommend it to include probability here. So focus on what's important for your leadership and stakeholders as well, and what's likely to actually get implemented the way you want it to happen, because there is nothing worse when you really love a project and you really want to make sure that it happens, and then you keep hearing the yes, but actually what gets implemented is not really what you wanted. It's probably worse than if it just wouldn't have been implemented in the first place, because now it's something that's been sort of close to your heart, and it just doesn't look like how you want it to look like, and you can't report on the results either. So I think that would be my advice. Another sort of part of this advice, to kind of bring this back a bit, is that if you're focusing on those soft skills, if you're focusing on collaboration, if the projects are being developed with the right stakeholders in mind, then it is much more likely that the strategy and the list of tasks you will come up with will already be a list of tasks that is achievable, and you have to sort of deprioritize and let go less and less of them. So it's kind of like, if it's more of an iterative process, then you can actually probably find that there are not as many sort of, oh, I already worked out this full idea and project and created all the resources for it, and now I just have to forget about it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, outstanding. And I love all the work you're doing, and I really like this. There's just a thread throughout all this to be a little bit less ego focused, a little bit more humble about the work that we do, which I think goes a long way. But I have to move forward to everyone's favorite part of the show. This is where Greg Gifford gives me a question for the guest, but he doesn't give me any context. So I don't know any more than you do, and it's a bit of a high wire act for both of us. He usually gives me one or two words. For you, Greg says conference slides, or gorgeous slides. I'm sorry. I believe this has to do with your conference slides in the presentation. Does this ring a bell at all to you?
Yes, it does. Yes. I spent quite a bit of time on my conference slides, and I've got some very nice tweets from Greg, and I spoke to him in person as well at the conference. There's actually a sort of funny story behind that, because when I get stressed or when just things are overwhelming, which obviously as you develop a conference topic, there is pressure, there is good stress, but still there is imposter syndrome. My way to cope with that has always been to sort of bring my creative side a bit forward. So I start drawing and designing things. So I've been using some of the original Alice in Wonderland drawings, and like using some coloring and some different backgrounds to create the slides, which I definitely spent hours, days even on that. But I don't even know, because that was just my balancing out all the pressure and all the stress to make sure that I can do a good job.
Well, it was a hit. Everybody loved it, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. I like the sorts of topics that you're talking about, and I think we need more of it. So I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to give you a virtual cheers. That's all our time for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of Suds Search. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.